Friday afternoon and the Faculty of Arts are all still on campus, hard at work. I know lots of people here, but not everyone. My name's Kathy Harris, and I'm the acting dean for this year, while Gage Averill is on administrative leave. We are extremely pleased to have President Santa Ono here to the Faculty of Arts, and as excited as I am to introduce him to you in a little while, I think I've enjoyed even more sharing the afternoon with him, showing Professor Ono around the Faculty of Arts. We've met with students, we've met with faculty, and there is more to come. As we all know, and I'm sure Professor Ono knows as well, the Faculty of Arts is an extremely diverse faculty from humanities, social science, professional schools, creative and performing arts, and we could spend weeks sharing our research with you, and instead we've picked a very small number of people who have very kindly agreed to share their work with you. And I could spend a lot of time introducing every one of them, and instead I'm just going to say their names and let them speak for themselves with their work. The order in which they'll be coming up and speaking will be Ayesha Chaudhry, who is an associate professor of classical, Near Eastern, and religious studies, and also cross-appointed in the Institute for Gender, Race, Sexuality, and Social Justice. Cesi, Cruz, an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Institute for Asian Research. Marwan, Hassan, who is professor and head of the Geography Department. Alfred, Hermida, there he is. Hermida, who is associate professor and director of the School of Journalism. Carrie, Jenkins, professor of philosophy, Andrew Martindale, associate professor of anthropology, and Ian Williams, who just joined UBC in January as an assistant professor of creative writing. I understand that Rumi has got everybody on a very tight schedule, so I'm going to move out of here and let Ayesha take the floor. Thank you all again, and thanks Rumi for organizing all of this today.
Thank you everyone for coming out here on a Friday afternoon. I'm actually kind of surprised at the number of people. So you're all troopers and you already get so many brownie points. Can everyone hear me in the back? Okay, that's great. So I'm going to be reading a short excerpt from an upcoming book that I'm writing. The book is called The Color of God. And the story that I'm going to be reading is from a story called Assimilation. And I'm going to be reading 3 sections from the story that are not all connected. So they're not sequential. So just so you know that. And what I'm writing about is the story that I'm going to tell you is a story about how white racism led my parents to embrace fundamentalist Islam. And in this book, I'm thinking about gender, race, and class and religion, and trying to take my research interests and speak accessibly, because I think that speaking accessibly is essential for the functioning of healthy liberal democracies. So to get to the story. My story of covering my hair, my face, my entire body, including my hands, is rooted in my mother's story. And her story of covering is wrapped up in her relationship with immigration and assimilation. Like the other girls in her hometown in Pakistan, my mother started covering her hair when she was a young child. But for the first few years after immigrating, she and my dad tried to assimilate into a white Canada. My father immigrated in the 60s with barely a 12th grade education. He was a welder and a construction worker. He brought, his words, not mine, my mother to Toronto, Canada after marrying her. She was 18 years old and bewildered by everything she saw. In the winter, she was stunned by the extreme cold. In the summer, she was horrified at the white bodies lounging in the sun around the swimming pool in the center of the apartment complex where she lived. She would peer down from her tiny apartment, dazed and disgusted by the lack of shame. She hated her tiny apartment. She always said it made her feel like an animal in a cage. She missed the courtyards and the fresh air of Pakistan. She was terrified of escalators. I inherited that fear from her. To this day, my heart beats just a tiny bit faster when I step onto an escalator. When it does, I imagine that this is how my mother felt about everything, all the time. But despite her constant anxiety and under my father's influence, she tried to assimilate. They both did. Pictures of my parents from the 70s capture the people they were trying to be. My father is clean-shaven, and at other times he sports a fashionable trim beard. He looks a bit dodgy in his 3-piece checkered mustard suits, and handsome in his flared pants and Ray-Ban sunglasses. He poses in front of his Mustang, sometimes leaning against it, other times standing behind an open front door. My mother smiles uncertainly in bell bottoms with a vest and small kerchief on her head, pushing a stroller in High Park. These pictures show two young South Asians, Pakistanis, desperately trying to fit in, to be accepted, to be white. But they were not white, they were brown. And 1970s white Canada did not let them forget it. Paki is the only slur they shared with us. Even now when they say it, I get a sense of how much it hurt them, how it took the wind out of their sails, how it made them want to give up and go back home. And they did both of those things, gave up and tried to go back home. Next section. Many people talk about the dream of return that immigrants desperately embrace. One day I'll go home. I'll make enough money and go back home to a country I belong in. But the cruel fact of immigration is that once you immigrate, you never really have a home. You never really belong anywhere. I'm talking about immigration out of necessity, out of desperation. A better word for this kind of immigration might be exile. Except it's not that you are forcibly expelled from your country of origin, but rather that the political, social, and economic conditions of your nation state and your own social class are such that you have no choice but to leave and try your luck elsewhere if you dare hope for a better future than your shitty present. There is literally no hope for social and economic mobility if you stay. Whatever the geopolitics of the region or the forces of the global capitalist system that led you to find yourself in this position, it does not really matter to you. All that matters is that you would rather stay home, but you know that there is no hope for you here. If you want a better future, you must leave. And you must go to a wealthier nation, a nation that is privileged by the global structures of inequality. And if you're really lucky, maybe you'll amass enough wealth to return home and help your parents and siblings and extended family. They'll need it, because if they stay put, as most of them will, their future will be bleaker than you could have ever imagined. Poverty will destroy your family. It will ravage the bodies of your loved ones. They will fight over scraps. They will die young from preventable diseases, without access to basic medical attention that might have saved them. It is these immigrants that hold tightly to the dream of return. This immigration is not the immigration of the wealthy elite in this world. It is not the immigration of those who hop nations and continents in pursuit of adventure, hobbies, and escape from boredom. Those people never actually immigrate, though in conversation, they might stop and ponder with unnecessary profundity. I guess I'm an immigrant too. These people don't even call themselves immigrants. They're expats. People who always belong somewhere else, and always have the luxury to head home, their real home, anytime they so desire. But immigrants of my parents' ilk cannot do this. They cannot just head home. They must accumulate wealth so that they can survive when they get back to a home they no longer recognize. For such immigrants, the dream of return remains just that, an unattainable dream that motivates them those first few years, and then slowly wanes and dies as they age. The dream of return dies for most immigrants well before they are buried in the foreign land that will become the closest thing to home that they will ever know. Last section. The reason, in the end, that my mother decided to wear the niqab in Canada was not because of Muslim patriarchy, but because of white racism, despite, or rather because, of a decade spent trying to assimilate, but failing to be accepted as Canadian. My mother's burqa was a shield from white racism. It is white racism that would eventually make fundamentalist Islam appealing to my mother. Wearing the face veil, the burqa, the niqab, did not increase the persecution and discrimination my mother faced. But now, instead of the insults, the cruel words, the harsh looks, hurting her feelings, why do you hate me because of my color? My mother could believe that her persecution was a measure of her sincerity, her worthiness. Religious persecution is noble, honorable, principled, meritorious. It is heroic. To be persecuted for your beliefs and to remain steadfast in the face of persecution, this makes you admirable. It makes you brave. It makes you courageous. It is the stuff of legend. Islam's promise of racial equality allowed my mother to survive white racism without internalizing a sense of racial inferiority. She was not inferior because of her race. God said so. And this is how it came to be that I was born into a house filled with the religious zeal of new converts, and why I began wearing the hijab when I was young. So young as to not remember when I started wearing it. Raised in the cradle of a religious identity fashioned as a shield, a protection from white racism.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cesi Cruz from the Department of Political Science. Is it okay? Yeah. Okay. It doesn't like that slide. Okay, we're on. So let me start, I'll jump right into the stories. It doesn't seem to like me introducing myself. During the 2007 Philippine elections, a group of heavily armed men entered a village to intimidate voters on election day. In 4 farms, they forcibly dipped the fingers of all of the farm workers in indelible ink in order to prevent them from being able to vote. It's auto-advancing? Yeah?
I don't
Okay.
think so.
That's fine. This is okay. So, but in the neighboring farms, the form of illegal electioneering took a strikingly different form. There, instead of bringing the machine guns, they left the machine guns in their truck, and instead they handed out sandwiches with 50 peso bills tucked underneath. And in an electoral context where there are no meaningful political parties, there's no sense of ideological or policy debate, patterns of support or opposition are not enough to explain these kinds of differences. So my work combines big data analysis, surveys, and field experiments in a way to unravel and unpack these complex political and social relationships, obligations, and expectations that drive politics in the developing world. But first, a little bit about what these networks look like. So here in Canada, we think about Facebook or LinkedIn, but the networks that I study are much more fundamental. I'm talking about families, friendships, marriages. And really, if you want to think about what they look like, think of those small towns where everybody knows everyone else, or families you might know where a small intimate gathering is upwards of 30 people. So that's along the lines of what I'm talking about. And in fact, it's all this very warm and fuzzy type of feeling that we get associated with networks, right? It's a bit like those movies like Love Actually, where everybody's connected and interact with each other in very cute ways. And in fact, in established democracies, social networks are associated with a whole host of positive outcomes. Individual well-being, voter turnout, civic and political engagement, you name it. But the problem is the way that social networks and politics interact in many new democracies means that the networks don't always look so nice and rosy and cutesy. Right? Instead of the sort of adorable interactions that you might expect, because of the fact that politicians can use social networks in order to engage in illegal electoral strategies, means that oftentimes what it looks like instead is a sort of jockeying for power and betrayals and informal alliances that you might see on HBO instead. Right? And so for example, in my work, what I find is that social networks affects who gets targeted for these things, right? People who have more friends and family members are more likely to be targeted for vote buying and electoral bribery, while people who happen to be central in their local village networks get targeted for electoral violence and coercion. And to make matters worse, because of these close-knit networks, it means that the effects spread quite readily, right? Beating up one voter might mean that dozens more are too scared to vote. My work also shows that social networks can lead to increasingly uncompetitive elections over time. My co-authors and I find that politicians tend to come from families that are much more central in marriage networks, and that their position in these networks gives them distinct advantages for conducting precisely the sort of illegal electoral strategies that we're concerned with in the first place. My work also shows that this dynamic can lead to poor economic outcomes when politicians are tempted to divert money from the government and from foreign aid sources in order to fund these kinds of illegal campaign activities. Right? After all, hiring all those private armies costs money, and you need money to be able to buy votes and implement the types of pork barrel projects that you have no intention of completing after the elections. And the saddest part of the story is that even when politicians themselves want to move away from illegal electoral strategies, they find that there's little in alternatives to doing so. As one mayor in a particularly low-performing municipality told me, he said, "Look, Cesi, if I could win elections by building schools and fixing roads, don't you think that I would do it?" And that's when it struck me that we need to move beyond these sort of technical or even institutional solutions to underdevelopment and corruption and think about, what is it that's constraining politicians from choosing the good policies in the first place. And so my current work, funded by the Faculty of Arts, among other sources, uses social networks to do precisely that. Using flyers like this one in large-scale field experiments, what we're trying to do is change the way that voters think of politics by giving them the tools to be able to evaluate the policies and promises of their candidates. The other part of my work uses social networks themselves as the intervention. So in Cambodia, what I'm doing is combining the SMS cell phone technology with social networks to design campaigns to encourage women to run for local office. So just to sum up, my work focuses on how social networks determine the choice of politicians to engage in these illegal electoral strategies, how they target these strategies to voters, and the implications for democratic accountability and economic development. And the new data sources and methodologies that I use provide compelling evidence of the really complex political networks and entrenched social structures that underlie politics in the developing world. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to talk about a completely different topic, and sometimes I feel strange within the Faculty of Art, and sometimes I feel I am the center of the Faculty of Art. And I'm going to explain why. I study landscapes. I study why mountains look the way that they look, valleys look the way that they look, and rivers. I study processes that shape the Earth's surface. The process that I study range in terms of scale from a grain of sand to continents. Actually, I see the water through a grain of sand. Within the landscape, I focus on rivers. I ask fundamental questions about rivers, how they function, what the control of these rivers, how they perform, and why they look the way they look. Within the rivers, I study mostly mountain streams. These are special physical systems. They are considered complex because the boundary condition is very irregular, wide range of particle sizes, and wide range of shapes. On the top of that, we have a development of surface structure, the way that you see in front of you, the steps and so on. And we deal with a turbulent flow, which is very difficult to predict. The traditional sediment transport theory assumes that particles, sediment, move as individual particles with no interaction among them, which means that we can calculate forces in the water and estimate how much sediment move. However, mountain streams don't work that way. There is a situation which we describe it an interaction between grains. Moving a grain interfere with each other. There is interaction between the boundary condition and the moving stones, which create a complex situation that the traditional theory doesn't take into consideration. What we decided in the last few years is to move away from the traditional theory and to introduce something we call it jam state. Jammed state is state when we have a lot of interaction between the grains and create a surface structure that stabilizes the channel. To achieve my goals, I conduct field work in Malcolm Map Forest. I perform flume experiments and I develop models. I collect data from the field and I simulate sediment transport in the lab under a controlled conditions. So I bring the field to the lab and I simulate things. This is our CFI laboratory, and we simulate sediment transport and channel morphology. Then I take all of the information and I develop model that I can use in order to predict sediment transport, but it also to generate new ideas and in new applications. In the last few years, we significantly developed the sediment transport theory, and we introduced the jam state as the control in mountain streams. And we use this theory in order to design channels and to restore streams. Stream restoration in the US is about $1 billion in terms of industry, which is very important. And we use our information in order to help remove dams. At the larger scale, we just finished modeling the Fraser River with looking on sediment transport and so on. And at the moment, we are looking into climate scenarios and sediment land use changes. And the idea behind it is to try to predict what will happen in the future in terms of sediment transport and the flooding. Another aspect of my work is life, how life impacts the channel morphology and the landscapes. I work on fish, I work on algae, I work on vegetation, wood in the channel. As you can see, the fish dig in the channel in order to lay eggs. And while they are doing that, they mobilize sediment, they change the channel morphology, and they create a new environment, what I call it, they engineer their environment. We worked, as you can see from this picture, they actually scour the whole bit and they change the whole channel morphology. Working on the small streams in the upper Fraser rivers, we actually documented that fish mobilize at least 50% of the sediment in these landscapes, which means it controls the sediment movement. In addition, In addition to that, we showed that fish change the channel morphology, increase the surface subsurface water exchange, increase the movement of water and oxygen within the gravel. But the most strange or the most exciting conclusion that we came with is that fish usually lay eggs below the scour layer. And this way the eggs are protected. We do not know why, but it could be an evolution issue. I said life and the importance of life. So also I work in very large scales. I work in China, in the Yellow River, in the Yangtze River, and the Mississippi. In the Yellow River, we examine the impact of agriculture, which is human-related activities, on sediment transport. And we documented that sediment transport in agricultural land is about 4 to 5 order of magnitude larger than other grassland and so on. In the Mississippi Basin, we work on the dams and the impact of the dams and land use on sediment transport. What we actually showed in our work that most of the sediment in the Mississippi come from the lower part, not from the Missouri, and this has to do with the history of land use, which is related to the first new European settlements 150 years ago. I start by saying I am driven by my curiosity, and being in the Department of Geography, I am more curious than in the past. Thank you.
Good afternoon. And now for something completely different. I'm going to talk less about my research and more talk about the work of our students and faculty. So thank you all for being here on a Friday afternoon. Thank you to Professor Ono. And I want to start by basically taking you back to early last year. And this is when we had a group of our journalism students who traveled to Chile as part of our international reporting program. This is a 2-semester course where students go abroad to report on issues that are not well represented in the mainstream media. Last year, they were tasked with a paradox on their trip to Chile. They were going to one of the countries that has emerged as a success story in Latin America, one of Latin America's most prosperous nations. But beneath that, there's social tensions. So they looked at two issues. They focused on the challenges facing migrants to Chile and the obstacles they faced, and then the continuing stigma that surrounds HIV in a religious and conservative society. So as part of this course, we worked in collaboration with Vice News, and they produced 2 documentaries for Vice News that were aired last summer. But this was also an opportunity to think about innovating, to think about innovating and pushing the boundaries of storytelling. So as part of this, the students also worked on creating virtual reality experiences. So not just tell the story, but create experiences that allow the viewers, the audience, to immerse themselves into that story. And it's an example of what we try to do at the journalism school, combining community-based experiential learning, interdisciplinary teaching, and international experiences, so that we can have students who see themselves as global citizens, see themselves addressing issues of social justice and harnessing journalism, the public interest, and who can innovate in media. And this is partly where, sort of, as a professional school located in the Faculty of Arts, we see ourselves, similar to other professional schools, preparing students to be future knowledge leaders, to contribute to meaningful discourse across all forms of media. Now, one of our areas of focus has been around Indigenous issues. And in 2011, at UBC, we created the first journalism course in Canada that focused exclusively on Aboriginal stories. That's our Reporting in Indigenous Communities course. So in this course, the students learn about the responsibilities, the challenges, the opportunities as journalists to intervene in public discourse on Indigenous issues, but in a respectful, in a thoughtful manner. The students work with communities in the Lower Mainland. They produce multimedia stories, and these are published online and also featured on CBC Online and on CBC Vancouver. And what we do here is draw for our teaching and learning from the strengths that we have as a faculty in research and professional practice, thinking in terms of providing students with a grounding in ethical journalistic practices, but an awareness of the changing landscape and really how they situate themselves in a world of media that is fast evolving. And that's where our research comes in. We focus on looking at this world of media where in some ways we are all the media. And we'll have active research agendas, and as director, it's great for me to be able to say to the acting dean, all our faculty are involved in shirk projects, and some of them have more than one, which makes me very happy and makes Kathy very happy. But I'll talk about just one of them, and this is from my colleague Candice Corlison, who's leading a project on Arctic journalism. So this is research investigating how journalists in the Canadian Arctic are adapting their professional norms, their practices, their standards, in order to navigate not just changes in the media, but changes in audience practices and changes in discussions around the Arctic, where this becomes not just a local issue or a regional issue or a national issue, but a global issue. She is one of our 3 faculty who had books in recent years, single-authored books. Taylor Owen examined how digital technologies are transforming aspects of international relations, in some ways questioning capacities that we've taken for granted that belong to the state, and instead being challenged largely through digital technologies. And my own book, which is analyzing the rise of social sharing and its impact on how publics understand and give meaning to the world around them. But as a professional school within the Faculty of Arts, we seek to ground that research also with high-level professional practice to span the academic world and professional communities. So we have at least 4 of our faculty involved in new media startups. Taylor Owen is the founder and publisher of Open Canada. It's a digital publication at the intersection of public policy, scholarship, and journalism. Peter Klein is in the process of setting up the Global Reporting Center, aimed at highlighting uncovered international stories that the mainstream media isn't reporting on. And then Marilyn Young and myself working towards the forthcoming launch of The Conversation Canada, a new source of analysis and commentary written by you, written by academics working with journalists, all published under Creative Commons and free to republish. So what we then do is take our research, take our professional practice, and feed that into teaching and learning, thinking of training the next generation of journalists who can contribute to, as Professor Ono put it to us, to our students the other day, as journalism as the bedrock of democratic society. And it feeds into the career readiness of graduates from the Faculty of Arts. Graduates who can adapt and evolve, embrace the fundamental changes taking place in media, the shift towards digital media within a global and networked knowledge economy. So on behalf of our students, faculty and staff, thank you for your time.
Hi everyone, I am Carrie Jenkins. If you're having any trouble hearing me at the back, please just give me a wave. I'm going to talk to you about a book that I have recently published. It's called What Love Is and What It Could Be, and I'm going to tell you in 6 minutes both what it says in the book and also why I wrote it. Wish me luck. Okay, I'm approaching the topic of romantic love from a deliberately interdisciplinary perspective. And the first place I went looking for clues about the nature of romantic love was in biology and biological anthropology, because we are a naturally occurring phenomenon. We are human animals. When we fall in love, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, adrenaline, all of these things are involved. The scientific method is how we know all of those things. The philosophy of science, critical perspectives on science from elsewhere, are how we know what to make of what the scientific method is delivering for us. The evolutionary history of the phenomenon that is us, and indeed the phenomenon that is romantic love, is hugely important, is hugely interesting, not least because our evolution is a relatively slow process. It does not change rapidly, so the context in which we evolved and the context in which these mechanisms in our brain that now constitute romantic love evolved did not look like the contemporary society around us, and so we have to be careful not to overproject things that come from somewhere else into what we think of as the brain or nature. So what do I mean by what we see around us now in our society? We see a lot of stories of love, a lot of representations of love. Here are some pictures of love. Normal love stories, they share features in common. The fact of this shared features being in common between our normal love stories creates a kind of composite image over time in which certain things emerge as strong contours in what then becomes a script for romantic loves that we are expected to follow. That script does vary across time and across places, but this will give you a fairly good sense of what I take to be the dominant one here and now. What is the result of creating this script? It means that we create norms. These can then be policed. And these can include norms around gender, romantic gender roles, norms around marriage, norms around sex, norms around reproduction, norms around monogamy, what I call mononormativity, the idea that romantic love should be with one person at a time. The norm of amatonormativity, a term due to another philosopher, Elizabeth Brake, the idea that it should be with one person. You can't have two relationships at once, but you're not allowed to have none either, or you're somehow inadequate and failing at life. These things effectively become the twin gutters that keep us all rolling down the same alley towards the same pins, which is, of course, the nuclear family. Okay, how do I end up dealing with the fact that love seems to have both a biological and a socially constructed character? Well, I end up talking about characters in a more literal sense as a metaphor. This here is William Shatner. It is also Captain Kirk, right? We have an actor here playing a role. Neither description is wrong. When we look at romantic love, we have ancient biological machinery, kind of like an actor, playing the starring role of romantic love in a show called Modern Society. Both of those descriptions are correct. We need to appreciate that they're both happening in order to understand the bigger picture. How good is that casting decision in the case of love? That, I think, is actually where a lot of the philosophical action is. Okay, let me talk now a little bit about why I'm doing all of this. I want to start conversations. We are too inclined as a social group to fall into the comforting arms of what I've called the romantic mystique. This is a name that very deliberately harks back to the earlier idea of a feminine mystique. It attempts to mystify love, to tell us we shouldn't overthink it, we should just accept it passively. We shouldn't challenge romantic love. If we do, our love lives will fall apart. Disaster. It's a disempowering ideology that promotes acquiescence in the status quo and ignorance. It encourages us to give up before we've started trying to understand what love is. So I want to challenge the romantic mystique. This is not an impossible puzzle to solve. We can pick up the pieces. I want to ask what needs to change. Are we still boxing people into roles, into romantic gender roles, perhaps? I think there are a lot of reasons to suspect that we are. I'm doing it partly because what happens when images like this appear in the media is very distressing to me. This is a picture of me right here. This is my husband. This is my boyfriend. This image was used on the cover of the Chronicle of Higher Education review section, and the headline splashed upon it was, "Can Carrie Jenkins make polyamory respectable?" Polyamory means the practice of having more than one romantic partner at the same time with everybody's knowledge and consent. When this image appeared, it provoked a wave of backlash against me that included misogyny, slut-shaming, racism, and even incitements to violence. This image and the reaction to it made me realize how crucial the word respectable in that headline actually was, and I had not realized until that moment just what role it was playing there, and I began to wonder, is that in fact the project? And I don't know. Certainly I would like to get more respect than I ended up getting. Another reason I want to ask these questions is because I want us to think about the kinds of control that we have and how we will choose to exercise that control going forward. And I mean both our control over the scripts, over the stories that we tell each other and that we consume, and also our control over the biological world, right? It's encouraging to see more challenges to biological determinism in other areas, and yet when we come to love, there's this inclination to think it just happens to be blam and you can't change nature. In fact, it's not how we think about a lot of other natural things like being eaten by a bear or dying of cancer. We do take control. These are not forces that are wholly out of our control. And when we try to say that they are, we're abdicating our responsibility to try to make them better. I'm doing it because even traditional so-called relationships can be very consciously chosen rather than fallen into or accepted as a kind of default setting. And I'm doing it finally because this phenomenon is so huge, it's so omnipresent, and it's so important, and it's so potentially dangerous. People literally live and die for this stuff, that just as a philosopher and as a human being, when I see something like that, I want to understand what is happening and I want to try to make it better. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, like everybody, I'd like to tell you a story, in part because as an anthropologist, I think that stories are a fundamental medium of human understanding. I think they're the way that we learn and how we know, guiding us to what we see and averting our gaze from things that we'd rather avoid. Whose stories we tell and who gets to tell stories have consequences for us all. I'm an archaeologist, and so my research focuses on things that people have left behind, the things from which we try to tell other people's stories. I work in indigenous territory, mostly in the lands of the Tsimshian people along the northern coasts. And so my work necessarily involves the stories of colonialism, including, and its consequences, including upon myself as a scholar. It's moving automatically. I shall survive. I work with indigenous scholars and the oral records that are the collective works of generations of Tsimshian people, recounting history as far back as glaciation. So the stories I encounter are in a different language, from a different people with a different way of knowing, and thus my work, like all anthropological work, involves translation between cultural frames. Indigenous people in this part of the world did not build pyramids in physical form, but rather devoted themselves to building collective systems of recording thousands of years of their history, all without writing. Edifices of the mind that are spectacularly impressive, but also easily ignored by non-native people. My research seeks comparison between the archaeological and oral records, a reasonably benign focus, or so I thought, but my early scholarship was consumed in an Aboriginal rights and titles case that resulted in the Supreme Court of Canada agreeing in 2011 that my PhD research concluded the opposite of my thesis. And so my story reminds us that knowledge is power. Stop doing that. And, and that scholarship is meaningful, even sometimes beyond our anticipation. It's now Canadian law that I argue the opposite of what I wrote, that my archaeology somehow disproved the Tsimshian oral record. Fake news, I think, is not just a political pastime, but rather it is the predisposition that all of us have to seeing the world as we expect it to be, rather than as it is. My recent work has benefited from the grace of the Tsimshian community, who surprisingly did not throw me off their land. Rather, we have worked together to use scholarship to make a better case, one that would move beyond the anecdotal evidence and stand up in court. We chose an event in Tsimshian history, a regional war in which northern invaders displaced the Tsimshian, who retreated from their coastal territories to the inland valleys. Here the story is recounted. They formed a political alliance and strategized to retake their coastal territory. The alliance was led by a Gitwalgyot's leader named Aksk, who supervised the construction of a shriek house, a building with a false roof. The invaders were lured by smoking fires. Warriors in the rafters used tubes from bull kelp to project the sound of snoring onto the sleeping platforms below. The invaders attacked. The roof fell. And the war to reclaim their lands had begun. While there's evidence of Aksk's shriek house in the archaeological record, Aksk's descendant and the chief of the Gitwalgyots, James Bryant, along with historian Susan Marsden and myself, we decided we needed to make a better case, one based on stronger evidence and logic. We sought to evaluate the oral records were clear. The war caused a wholesale retreat from the coastal territory, lots of people moving and staying away for a fairly long time, and this was a behavioral correlate of sufficient scale to be testable against the material record. We sought to evaluate oral records against the archaeological data, an inversion that suited our legal context, and from an inventory of 66 coastal villages built on engineered platforms made out of shell, we sampled basal and terminal components from 48 using coring methods that we had refined. Our results confirmed that all the villages of the coastal territory were abandoned between 1300 and 1100 years ago, and that subsequently all the villages were then rebuilt within the defensive confines of the Prince Rupert Harbor. The resulting pattern shows a clear settlement shift. Now I've pushed the wrong button. There we go. That was me. The resulting pattern shows a clear settlement shift, comparable to the descriptions in the oral record. However, we felt that the evidence alone was insufficient to withstand a legal scrutiny, so we applied further tests. We assessed the relative sea level changes over the last 14,000 years by mapping diatom species in lake sediments. The resulting curve shows that while sea levels changed considerably since the late Pleistocene, they were stable during the period of settlement involved in the war, and thus could not be an explanation for the patterns we saw. Our chronology relied on radiocarbon dating of shell, and the chemical pathways of radioactive carbon through marine systems are complex. And so we compiled our own tests to refine the calibration and concluded that our dates were accurate and precise, and thus we were not seeing what was not there. We used LIDAR and surface surveys to ensure that our sample was representative. We conducted spatial metrics on architectural patterns to assess the range of heterogeneity in the population and employed randomized tests to ensure that the identified patterns were representative of history. We compiled our results using conservative Bayesian statistical modeling, against which the pattern of settlement hiatus remained robust. Thus, our hypothesis that the oral records were historically accurate resisted our best efforts at disproof. And so we concluded what all Tsimshian people already knew. Their history was real. But in doing so, we have developed a case that withstands academic and legal scrutiny by being resistant to the biases of culturally situated expectations, even when those biases are framed as objective. Like non-native archaeologists, I don't think the Canadian courts intended to misunderstand Indigenous scholarship. Rather, that was just how they had learned to see the world. Thus, the moral of my story is not that objectivity overcomes cultural bias. That would lead us to conclude that we only need a scientific understanding of the world. And rather, my point is that knowledge is sensible only in its cultural context. To unravel that more fundamental truth, I think we need social science and humanities research. Thank you.
Clicker. It's too advanced. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ina Williams. I'm in the creative writing program. Just started in January. So brand new poet on campus. And this is my bow tie in tribute to, there you go. So the work that we do in creative writing is both emotionally rich and emotionally expensive, which means that there's a real kind of effective consequence or cost that we pay when we go home and we leave our offices. And novels and stories and poems, they live with you for years. So when we think about resources, there's a real material cost to living in this body and writing our creative work. The poem that I'd like to share with you is called Mood Disorders. And it's a live poem, meaning it's not completely done yet. It's still in draft form. But you'll see just kind of how the creative process sort of slices through us and poems remain alive. Mood as a term has currency both in psychology, and that's how we familiarly use it. What's your mood, right? How do you feel? And also in grammar, right? There are three modes or moods in English. And so what happens when the general kind of anxiety of our age crosses with a grammar that depends on order and structure in order to make meaning, right? This vague feeling of unease that we all have with a grammar that's really meticulous. Two epigraphs. The first one is from Alice Miller. The true opposite of depression is neither gaiety nor absence of pain, but vitality, the freedom to experience spontaneous feelings. Second epigraph from learningenglish.de. Yes, verbs have moods, not good moods and bad moods though. They're not actually moody. The so-called mood of the verb simply expresses the viewpoint of the speaker or writer, their wishes, intents, or assertions about reality. You are feeling wrong because someone wrong did something wrong to someone wrong, because the autumn leaves, now your girlfriend leaves, now your father this, now your mother that, because Charlie bit. The therapist is tapping my thorax for tympany and dullness. She is listening. I say, I feel nothing. What does nothing feel like? I say, I said I feel nothing. What does nothing? Nothing feels like water. Good. What kind of water? Like, is it sparkling? Like the part of the ocean where whales mate. Say more, she says. Do you like Ravel? I say, don't change the subject, she says. I'm not changing, I think. I feel like my satellite radio only gets Handel and the Beatles. Nah, 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 nah. When the therapist says, you should think more about how you feel, I think she should think more about what she says. But I say, isn't that like seeing more of what you hear? And I hear her say, because she has advised me not to tell others what they said, but what I heard them say. I'm overthinking. Too much, I think, therefore I aming. Once more, I thought, therefore I was not feeling myself. Once more, with feeling. I'd like a Sprite. Infinitively, nothing feels like I am to be, when I would like to be, to feel. The therapist says, imagine yourself in the ocean, on a raft. You don't need to be Jonah. No one has cast you overboard. If I want to survive, I would have to drink my own, and why not? Where has my compunction landed me? Infinitely, I am the naked blur pushed down a staircase. Could I not have been born accidentals in Chopin's right hand? Or ragged claws in Beyonce's fan-machined manger? I feel you. You feel me? I feel you. You feel me? I feel in you. You feel in me? I feel in you. You feel in me? I feel like you do. You feel like I feel. I feel like you do. You feel like I feel. I feel like you. Do you feel like I feel? I feel like you. Do you feel like I feel? I feel like you. Do you feel like I feel like you? Do you feel like I feel like you? Do you feel like I feel like you? Do you feel? Thank you.
Well, that was amazing. Holy crap. Thank you all so much. You know, I've actually surprisingly moved to have our colleagues share our work with us, and I hope we can do more of this. I'm coming. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Santa Ono, and although he doesn't really need an introduction, I'm going to give him one anyway. I'll make it quick. Professor Ono is by training a scholar of medicine and biology. He's known for his research on the immune system, eye inflammation, and age-related macular degeneration, which is a leading cause of blindness. He plays a mean cello, which I can attest to from Imagine Day. I'm going to dispense with the rest of it and ask you to join me in welcoming Professor Ono.
Thank you very much. You can put Beyonce up there. I like Beyonce. Well, I want to thank you all for being here on a Friday. I had something that I had written, but I'd rather just have a conversation with you if you don't mind. I got to tell you that the Faculty of Arts is a stunning place, and I've only had a few hours to spend going from place to place, and there are 22 buildings. And that's just the surface of what happens here. And I want you to know that I'm incredibly impressed with what I saw, and that I'm absolutely committed to coming back and meeting more of you and learning more of what happens. The breadth and depth of what happens in this faculty is absolutely astonishing. And I want to have an opportunity to have more meaningful and slower conversations with more of you. And I hope that you'll welcome me back, and that you'll give me additional opportunities to visit more of the departments and more of the buildings. It's been an absolute joy for me to spend these few hours with you. And I'm going to make a few comments, and then I'd like to have a conversation with you, if that's okay, because we don't often have these sorts of opportunities. Sometimes I pass some of you in buildings and I wave, but this is really a chance for me to hear from you, and for me to learn how I can serve you, because that's my role as your president, is to understand what it is that excites you, what it is that you view as opportunities, what you view as challenges, and to see how I can take that information as a faculty member and to bring it to the governor and to the Senate, as the chair of the Senate, to really be your voice and your advocate. Whether you're a faculty member, and I'm so excited there's so many students here, whether you're a staff member, my role is really to advocate for all of you. Now, the presentations that I heard, these short vignettes, were absolutely amazing. And I took notes, not because I'm afraid of being detested on any of these things would petrify me, but because I was so impressed by each and every one of you. And I'm certainly not an expert in anything that you do, but it was a thrill because, as you've heard, in recent years I've specialized, as all of you do. In my case, it was in molecular genetics and immunology, and really trying to understand why people develop age-related macular degeneration, with the hope that that might help us detect it early enough to intervene. And that's what I really do for a living. And then somehow I got off on this tangent of being an administrator. But I want you to know that my foundation really was at the University of Chicago, which has an indelible imprint on how I view the academy. of the universities. I don't know if any of you actually have spent time at the University of Chicago, but in the United States, it's really considered the bastion of liberal arts. And many of you know about the Great Books program. And so if any of you went to the University of Chicago, you know that even though I was a biological sciences major in 1980, I took the Common Core program. And it was nostalgic for me to go to the Haldane Arts Center and to see students and faculty doing what I used to do with lithography and printmaking. I loved doing that. And I loved spending time looking at paleobotany and some of the things that were at the interface of science and understanding history. And your words were really very, very remarkable and profound to me because of that. So for me, coming back to having the opportunity to visit the arts was really an opportunity for me to go back in time to 1980 when I was working for my arts degree at the University of Chicago. Now, Ayesha, where are you? What an amazing, powerful presentation. So personal, so emotional, and so pertinent to some of the feelings that I feel as an immigrant. Yesterday, I spoke in front of the Sakura Gala. And as you know, Japanese Canadians, of which I am one, have overcome quite a bit of pain over the past 50 years. And so I feel for you. And if I can ever be of assistance to you or your family, because I've struggled, our family has struggled with those feelings of being far from home. I remember, this is getting pretty personal, I hope you don't mind, but you were very personal. And so the biggest compliment to one being personal, if you don't mind, is me being personal with you, is I remember, some of you know that we came here after post-war Japan, when much of the country was devastated. And my father was one of the lucky ones, having been identified by Robert Oppenheimer, the head of the Manhattan Project, as a handful of mathematicians in Japan that they wanted to give an opportunity to come to a country that was much richer, where people like Einstein were at the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study. And it's because of that amazing lucky circumstance that we were given a chance to leave that country and that defeated country and to come to the country that had defeated Japan. And my father and several other mathematicians were given an opportunity to rub shoulders with the greatest minds at the time in Princeton, New Jersey. And then after that, my father was offered his tenure track position here in mathematics at the University of British Columbia. So a lot of things that you said, I remember tremendous pain in my family because after the war, Japanese Canadians and Japanese Americans weren't exactly the most popular group of people in North America. And I remember as a child dealing with my younger brother being tied up and having a dead bird thrust down his shirt in the forest. And so some of the pain that you talk about, I can relate to. And despite that, I remember my mother wanting to go home. And I remember when they finally were able to go home, because they had no money, I remember how Japan had changed so much that it was no longer the Japan that they remember. So your words are incredibly powerful and so important now in this scary, terrifying moment in history with questionable leadership. Don't tweet that, please. Where Islamophobia in this nation and around the world and anti-Semitism really, really scare me. And it shows you how fragile the balance is between a just and inclusive world and the kind of pain that you and my family have felt. So thank you for that. Incredibly powerful. And I'd love to read more about your work. Please do share it with me. This goes for every single one of you as well. It's easy to get a hold of me. My email is santa.ono@ubc.ca. And a lot of you actually direct message me on Twitter, and my Twitter address is @UBCPrez, Prez. So please do connect. Am I pronouncing this right? Is it
Cesi.
Cesi Cruz? You know, it's your work was in many ways scary, and also in a way for me, I have some optimism, and I have a personal interest in social networks, as you probably know. I'm writing a book for Johns Hopkins University Press called "The University President in the Digital Age: Social Media for Social Good." And I'd love to share that with you. Hopefully I'll finish. I'm being distracted. I was supposed to be finished by January, but you know what it's like. But I'm sure you all finished your contract before on time, but I hope to finish it by May. And maybe I'll give you a preprint of the manuscript, and I'd love to have your views on it. But the optimistic part of it that resonates with me is not so much the network and identifying those individuals to be violent against, in terms of manipulating voter participation, but the positive aspect of mobilizing social media for social good. And so thank you for that. And the one thing I wanted to talk to you about is, and I promise this is just the conversation, because I'm so excited by your scholarship, but you know, I was at this, some of you know that I was given this job I didn't ask for by the Premier called Chief Innovation Officer for BC. A lot of people wonder, what does that have to do with me, especially if I'm in humanities or social sciences? But if you look at your work, there's tremendous potential for some of the things that I saw at the BC Tech Summit and what you do. Because of the power of analytics, the power of looking at ever-increasing data sets of individuals as they connect, and getting a better and more crisp understanding of the network, and the power of leveraging it for social good. You know what I'm talking about. You probably know this. You probably know the same guys at Oxford that are focusing on that, and we can talk about that. And I'm trying to think a little bit about that, but I'm especially interested in whether you've thought about working with Watson, the IBM unit called Watson. It's called Watson AI. Are you familiar with them?
I am, but I'm not. Yeah, so they do some really heavy data analytics.
Absolutely, and absolutely. I'd like to connect you with them because they can help you accomplish more social good because of the power of what they can do. They can look at the universe of tweets. They actually, one of the first people they studied, this is scary, is me. Because one of the things they're trying to figure out is whether they can, and some of it could be for good means and some of it could be bad for bad means, but one of the things they're trying to do is to use that power of analytics to try to predict how people will vote, or how people will behave, or what product they'll choose based upon the universe of things that they put out in social media. And I'm sort of prolific, so I was one of the first people. I can share with you my personality-ogram, and they're trying to do that for every single person. And it's scary what they can do. And they're at the interface with the Battelle Laboratories of Genomics and Informatics. And so I'd love to talk with you offline. And I was incredibly excited by your talk. Marwan, where's Marwan? There you go. What an amazing presentation. You know, I want to visit your CFI lab.
You are welcome.
Where is it?
It's in the Ponderosa Commons.
Okay.
New building there.
It's Ponderosa Commons, really? Yeah.
I'm called capitalist because I have the largest lab in terms of space.
You have the largest lab in the university?
Yes.
Okay.
It's through CFI that I went.
Yeah.
And I built the lab.
Congratulations. Congratulations. So do you actually have salmon in your lab?
No. The salmon I study in the streams.
Yeah.
But what I do, I found a way to dig these reds and to simulate them in the lab without harming the fish.
Okay. Well, one thing I noticed was on one of your slides in the corner it said University of Washington. Do you collaborate a lot with University of Washington? So this is for you and for everyone. I don't know if you know, we just got $1 million from Microsoft.
Yeah.
And the reason we got that, and I hope that you'll all take advantage of this, this is the kind of thing I want to have a conversation with you about, is I was at this conference called the Cascadia Conference, and the idea is that Vancouver and Seattle, many people predict, there actually been a study, will emerge as one of the world's most competitive technological and innovation hubs. And part of the reason is because of UBC and the University of Washington. And so Bill Gates came up to this conference, it's been written up in the New York Times, and said the reason why Microsoft has been successful is because we're next to the University of Washington. And the impact of University of Washington has not just been in computer science, but in everything that they do, including humanities and social sciences. And in fact, the humanities and social sciences are more important for Microsoft more than anything ever before, because they're diversifying into virtual and augmented reality, into gaming and things like that. So more and more, they're relying on not computer science and engineering, but on the totality of the university. And so, as you know, they've invested in Vancouver, and they want to take advantage of this emerging next Silicon Valley, which they think this region is going to be. And they think that it'll be to the advantage of both Seattle and Vancouver and both universities to develop more interaction. And so to facilitate that, to catalyze it, they've given us $1 million for faculty and students between the two great universities to work together and more. So please contact me if you know people in the University of Washington, it's a great university, that you think you can collaborate with, because the money is not just for computer science, the money is to stimulate interaction, and actually it's focused more on social good and social innovation than on technological innovation. So I hope you all know that you know how to get a hold of me to do that. And the president of University of Washington and I would like to supplement that funding from Microsoft to really grow this relationship. As some of you may know, University of Washington is the second largest research university in the United States, second only to Johns Hopkins University. And Johns Hopkins' budget is very large because they manage the applied physics laboratory. So if you take that away from Johns Hopkins, University of Washington, UW, is the biggest research university in the United States. And so it's not a bad partner to interact with. And they have a history of collaborating with UBC. As you know, their president actually came here, visited, and evaluated some of the programs in the arts. So I want to tell you about that. I'll try to move more quickly. Alfred, where's Alfred? Alfred, there you go. Well, we just saw each other last week. Yeah. And I want to thank you for inviting me to interact with your students. And, you know, they're very bright students. And I felt like I was in the most difficult press conference of my life. They don't like the fact that international tuition went up. But the one thing I wanted to say to you really quickly so we can get to the conversation is that your work on Chile and HIV, are you aware of the world-leading strengths that we have in public health and HIV in UBC? Are you interacting with them?
Part of the project was a collaborating team.
With Julio? Okay. And the other thing is Conversation Canada. Is that your spin-off or is it a colleague?
This is Marwan and myself. We're
This is you.
launching it, and UBC is one of our founding partners.
Yeah, you know, I want to talk to you more because we want to do a better job telling UBC stories. We don't think that the world knows best well enough, in fact, even internally, but in Vancouver itself, and certainly in Canada and globally, we need to tell the UBC story better. And it's actually important because it's a problem when you go to Ontario and they think the world revolves around UOP and water. You need to let them know about all the great work going at UBC. And so we might be able to collaborate on that if you're interested in that. We can either use that or we can use some other kind of collaboration involving your students. That would be fantastic. Carrie Jenkins, thank you for the book.
You're welcome.
And don't worry about what the Chronicle of Higher Education says. Because if you read that, you notice that I'm a frequent subject of the Chronicle of Higher Education. Don't take it too seriously. Don't take any media, Stay strong. And what you're saying is really, really important. I think you know that when I saw the first slide, it was almost exclusively heterosexual relationships. I turned to my left and I said, That's a rather monochromatic view of what love is. And I was told that in the second chapter you deal with that. So.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
I mean that's the point.
I know, I understand that, and I get it, and I can't wait to read your book. So thank you very much. And it's a message that needs to be told. Two more. Andrew Martindale. You know, that was probably the most powerful story of the intersection of science and social science and humanities that I've ever heard. It was brilliant. Can I get that a sentence that you said at the end, that science needs, what did you say? Science needs, I want to quote you. Science needs humanities and social sciences more than anything before.
In a sense, the moral of the story is not that objectivity overcomes cultural bias. That will lead us to conclude that we only need a scientific understanding of the world. But my point is that knowledge is only sensible in its cultural context, and to unravel that more fundamental truth,
We need.
social science.
Okay, I need that to quote you, okay? Do you have that on your computer? I don't. Okay, I'd love to have that. Have you ever heard of the tour de force? I mean, carbon dating, the extent of different techniques that you use to essentially conclude that the oral stories were correct. Beautiful story. Thank you so much. That's a story we should tell. Let's see, I'm almost done. Mood disorders. Ian, what an amazing poem. How long have you been here?
Since January.
Oh yeah, well welcome. I mean, it's so refreshing. It's so great to have you amongst us in the faculty, and I hope that you'll give me your poem when it's done.
All right.
No. And I want to do one thing before we open it up for questions. Like, I want to give you my bow tie. No, you don't have to give me yours. Now, the problem is, this is a Harvard bow tie. So I hope you'll still wear it. I do that only occasionally when somebody really moves me and you really move me. Keep up the great work. So, all right. So we're going to go into the dialogue part. I know you got to go home, but I told you about my impressions. It's an amazing faculty. You may or may not know this. Even though I'm a biological scientist, and I still have a laboratory, I hope you're getting the idea that I'm not a typical scientist. That I'm passionate about music, poetry. Actually, I was on the poetry magazine as a high school student. But I'm embarrassed to show you my poetry. But I'm a wannabe arts person, and so if you go into the cyberspace and you Google Santa Ona liberal arts, you'll see articles that I've written defending the liberal arts, and it's a travesty that people think that liberal arts have to be defended, and the reason is simply because I don't think we're doing a good enough job in higher education, articulating the value of the liberal arts. And so what am I trying to do? So you know I've written these articles, please read them. But I'm trying to work through two powerful organizations to try to tell the story better. Storytelling is so important. One of them is called the AAC&U, the American Association of Colleges and Universities. A lot of them are liberal arts colleges. Some of them are major research universities, such as UBC. We join because I think we need to be part of the dialogue, part of the story of the importance of liberal arts. And so I'm working through that, and I've been selected to be in a small group of presidents whose job it is to come up with a compelling case for support of the liberal arts around the world. One of our targets is essentially government right now, that there isn't sufficient support, and we're particularly vulnerable with the administration down south thinking about eliminating the national endowment of the humanities national endowment of the arts. So I'm one of your advocates trying to retain support for financial support for scholarship in the arts and humanities. And you may have seen a tweet. We just were invited, and UBC was just invited to be an institutional member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And there are a number of faculty members, maybe some of them here, who are members of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. There's a couple of things I'd like to do. One is that although we have quite a few here, we have such outstanding faculty that hopefully I can use that position as a representative on that group to nominate more of the faculty members here to be members of that American Academy of Arts and Sciences. It's not just an honorific society, it's a powerful group that I think has the best chance in articulating the importance of the liberal arts for humanity in general. So I will continue to do those sorts of things, and I hope that you will work with me to tell the story of the importance of the liberal arts. I'm going to stop now, but I'm going to tell you a couple of ways I think I can help you. One of the things that I noticed on my trip around maybe 6 of the 22 buildings is that some of the buildings are state-of-the-art, beautiful, wonderful, better than I've seen anywhere else. Some of them need some help. And you have a whole bunch of students, the largest faculty. You have students that, if you go to the science faculty, they have a nice space just for the students. And I was surprised that the art students here, even though there's 13,000, right, have a little bit of one floor of one wing of the campus. And so coming to the faculty like this really helps me understand what the needs are, not only in terms of student space, but also I went to the Asian Center and I saw a roof that was leaking or stained like it had leaked, and I learned about the vision for renovating that whole place. Visiting as many of your buildings and departments will let me really understand firsthand how I can help you. And I can help you in a number of different ways. I am the chair of the executive committee. I am the chair of the Senate. Things like capital prioritization flow through the executive, but ultimately the executive is advisory to me. So if I can really understand what the needs are, then I can really advocate for prioritizing things that otherwise I wouldn't know because I haven't seen them and I haven't heard the needs. So please let me come back and see what it is that I can do for you. And don't be shy about telling me what it is that is needed to support your scholarship and your life as faculty members and students. So I can help in that way in terms of decision making, but I can also help because, as you know, a good part of my job is externally facing. A good part of my job is working with provincial and federal government and also with the strongest supporters and foundations around the globe to make sure that the university gets as much money as possible to invest in the academic core mission of the university. So the other way I can help you is if I know what it is that you need to support your scholarship and your life as a student or a faculty member, as a staff member, then when I meet with Michael Aldane or if I meet with a number of different people here and around the world, then I know what to advocate for. And that's the way it works. You know, I go from place to place. You can actually watch Twitter, you know that's what I do, is I get in front of people, lots of billionaires and multimillionaires. If I know exactly what it is that you need, then I can advocate for you more effectively. And the last thing that I want to say before I just open it up for anything that you want to talk about is we're in the midst of something called a strategic planning process. And I hope that you have read some of my broadcast emails. I hope you have read my blogs. I'm starting up vlogs as well, but those are not very informative. Those are just for fun. It's actually important. There are different kinds of strategic plans that universities get engaged in. There are some that are very high level, that will identify general themes, and won't actually identify projects and priorities that will have money behind it. This is a totally different strategic planning process. We have money identified, and we're trying to build even a larger purse to invest in the priorities. We're relatively early stages in the strategic planning process. We've sent you an email. If you haven't read it, please read it. Please encourage the other faculty members and department chairs in your faculty to read my emails because there are a number of different town halls that you can come to. And there are lots of different ways that you can provide input. And some people have and some people haven't. I've been with your dean and I said, please make sure that you give me project proposals because if they're not submitted, I can't fund them. So please engage with me. There's a website, there's a portal, there are multiple opportunities. You have plenty of time to do that, and it's really important you do that because there will be money that will be resourced and investment towards some of the projects that you submit to me. So I'm going to stop talking. Hopefully that's helpful for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Go ahead.
Thank you for your remarks. You've expressed a lot of enthusiasm.
Please tell me your name.
What?
Please tell me your name.
John O'Brien, I'm
Hi,
in
John.
art history.
Oh, how are you?
And these are all in my department.
Hi.
You expressed a lot of enthusiasm for the Technics corridor that you hope to open up with UW. Bill Gates is $1 million, Vancouver. And I expect that will succeed. But this group is more likely to be concerned with the social problems and divisions that come out of that. As we know in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, there is a class war.
Sure.
Real estate's gone ego.
Sure.
Not that it hasn't here.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about
Yeah.
that, what role will that play, and will people in this room and elsewhere have something to say about that?
So if you attended the BC Tech Summit, you will know that one of the things that I said was that that's one of my fears. And that I have convinced, I've worked with the province, and I've said one of the things that is essential, and they've actually put it into the budget, is that when you have this kind of change to a knowledge economy, there are people that are left behind. This is a province which, for the longest time, has been dependent on the resource sector, whether it's mining or whether it's forestry. And so I worry about that a great deal, and I talk about it all the time. And I think that the government, and I think that colleges and universities have a critical role to make sure that that doesn't happen. There are lots of examples. There are examples of cities that have been able to make that transition, and there's a whole group that's been left behind. And we want to avoid that as much as possible. And so I want to thank you for bringing it up. It's on my radar screen. One of the things that I have to do is to create this innovation network, which are not only the colleges and universities and companies and supporting agencies, but to really perform over the next several months a pretty comprehensive analysis of what's needed to do this right, including who might be left behind. And what kinds of programs do we need to create, and who's going to provide those retraining and certification programs so that people that have plenty of working life history left in them are not left behind, so that they can, when machine learning comes and when Internet of Things takes over and you don't need as many people doing the things that they do. You see it all the time. You go to the airport and there's these stalls where people used to tell you how much you owed because you've been parking at YVR for X number of days. It's all machine. So people lose their jobs. And so we got to work and figure out before it happens what we can do. And we're going to have, I'm going to have a responsibility, and universities are going to have responsibility. So thanks for that. Thank you. Other questions? Go ahead.
Elizabeth Hodgson from the
Hi,
English
Elizabeth.
Department. I just want to say how profoundly I am encouraged that you actually see your role as serving faculty and students. We
What other
haven't
role
heard
is
that
there?
from a senior administrator for a long time at UC.
What other role is there?
So we're very, I'm very moved by that. And I can tell you two things that you can help us with in the Faculty of Art. One is the vulnerability of what is essentially the lab for most of us in the humanities, which is our library. And the other is the vulnerability of many of our colleagues who continue to be given short-term contract unpaid work. And we have a lot of contract faculty in the Faculty of Arts because we offer small interactive classes, but they are being exploited by the university system. And so those are two things, if you can see a way to address either one of those.
You should email me. I was with, now what was that? The person who was in the Vancouver School of Economics, who's done a study of those sorts of disparities. And I asked her to work with me. I've only been here for 6 months, so I'm still learning what's not happening the proper way here. And I talked to her honestly about there's work that needs to be done in terms of gender equality, gender equity in terms of salary. There have been some begrudging steps to address that, but there's still more work to be done. And so my email is santa.owner@ca. It's very easy. Please, I hear those points, but email me so I have it front and center. These are things that take a little bit of time to address, but thanks for bringing that up. So that reminded me of 2 things, right? The library.
Library.
Well, you know, we're in the final stages, and I think there are 3 finalists for Dean of Libraries. I can't tell you where they are because I'll be getting in front of the provost, but they're really, really good candidates. And so, you know, if you look at my history at different institutions, when I was at the University of Cincinnati, when every other university was closing their presses, I started a press. So the library, I get it, the library is at the heart of what we do as an institution. I am worried that our ranking, the ARL ranking, has gone down. That's not a good sign. So hopefully you will write to me and submit to Emma Cunliffe that you hope that in the strategic planning process, when funds are allocated, that something's done to arrest the decline of the UBC library. Go ahead.
Thanks, I'm Jonathan Ichikawa.
I know you from social media. You usually have green hair.
It's always changing. The
Did you
vision's a
say
little dark.
Patrick's Day? and don't I know your dad?
Do you know my dad?
I think so. Anyway, but
Oh,
go ahead.
So, in explaining UBC's recent decision to reinstate an invitation to John Furlong to give a talk,
Sure.
You were quoted in the UBC as emphasizing that the abuse allegations against Furlong hadn't been proven in court, and I think you put it this way: you said UBC shouldn't put its own judgment above that of the courts. And I was struck by the fact that that kind of reasoning is very similar to an argument that I often hear against the idea that university sexual assault policies at all. People sometimes say things like, if an assault allegation occurs but it hasn't been proven in court, then a university shouldn't do anything at all about it. And so I guess my question is whether you're attracted to that sort of reasoning, or whether you think that serious allegations.
That kind of reasoning at all. It was not an easy situation at all. It was not one that I brought on because it was an invitation that was made by a unit within the institution. You know, I should say that the example that you try making a parallel with is not exactly the same, in that if a sexual assault occurs on campus, it is our responsibility to look into it, and we do look into it. In this case, this is something that happened quite a long time ago, so it was much harder for me or for the university to adjudicate because it didn't happen within our own campus. And also, it's something that has already, just some fraction of it has been looked at, not all of it. It's not an exact parallel. In one case, it's happened recently on campus. We have a responsibility, a moral and legal responsibility to look into. In the other case, it's something that happened long ago that's not exactly in our jurisdiction. So I hope you can understand that. I gotta tell you, it's a very, very difficult situation. And what I didn't want for people to interpret the decision was that in any way I was discounting the possibility that something might have happened. That's not what I was saying. It's just that I didn't know. And in a very acute, short window of time, where one argument was that he should remain innocent until proven guilty under the law, and on the other hand, perhaps he was guilty. I wasn't equipped with the direct information or the wherewithal to substantively and decisively make that determination, which is a responsibility for the university in the case of something happening internally. Thanks for that question, by the way. Any other questions?
Actually, another thing that I wanted to mention something about your very, very kind and charming response to me which included the advice not to worry about comments online. And I wanted to suggest maybe just that sometimes we do need to worry about that.
Oh,
a lot of women colleagues routinely, when they get online with their research, if it's a little bit controversial, do face a lot of backlash, harassment, and this can, be very
And then we should
serious.
protect you.
Um,
And I
well,
will,
I
will,
mean-
yeah, and I should try to protect you, yeah.
I'm not asking you for protection.
No, I'm not saying you should, I'm not saying you should, but I'm saying that we should think that way.
I'm saying it needs not to be dismissed and to be ignored, and the advice to women, I don't think should be to ignore it, but to
No.
make clear that this is actually a serious problem and needs to be addressed.
It is.
Because it can be a barrier to people sharing their research.
Oh, absolutely. So just to clarify, I didn't want to minimize what it feels like to be under the gun. Believe me, I've been under the gun enormously. I really, my sentiment was that I'm standing there with you. And if you feel those things, don't feel alone. It is a responsibility of the university to stand up for the faculty. And what you're doing is right. So please don't misunderstand me.
I do worry about this and say anything.
Yeah.
I will continue to worry.
And we're all human, and I worry a lot. What I do is actually, when things like this happen, and as you know, it's from the question recently, when you're between a rock and a hard place and you have to make decisions, and you know that whatever decision you make, not everyone will be in favor of your decision, you have to have the fortitude to stand behind your best decision, and then you have to take care of yourself. So you have to let people stand up for you, and what I do is I go home and play the cello. So hopefully you have something like that. Any other question? I'm in no rush. You can go.
You one more,
If you can leave if you want, but I'm here for you.
I guess one other comment. So my name is Jenna Massey. I work for both the VP Students Office, but I'm also still an undergraduate with the Faculty
You
of
work
Arts.
for the what? Which office?
The VP Students Office.
Louise County.
Yeah, for Louise.
Yeah.
But I'm also an undergraduate in the Faculty of Arts.
Okay.
And you spoke about student space, and actually on the arts side, arts students 4 years ago voted to create an arts student center.
I know.
As
And they've
you
been
probably
raising money,
know.
and they're trying to raise 2.6 million.
Yeah, and I think there's still a lot of hope that will happen, and we're working towards it. But because of both how long ago that decision was made by students to move forward and the nature of student leadership and trying to rally support, that has been a project that it's still there, but has fallen off the radar, I think, a little bit on the student side. Not as much on the Faculty of Arts side, which is great to see. Engage Avril, in my time when I was still around, was a huge supporter, and I'm sure you are as well. And
so am I.
yeah, absolutely, and that's great to hear. And so making sure that that's a priority, both in terms of the learning opportunities that space will offer, but also in terms of having a home for the 13,000 art students that are here, is a huge one. And so thinking about imperatives, and especially in terms of capital projects, on the student side, that's a huge priority to consider.
I hear you, and that's one of the big takeaways of my visit. And it's gonna take some time to raise up that sort of money. And the first thing for me to know is that it's a priority. And then, as I said, as I go around and meet with people who have the ability to write those sorts of checks, that's why it's so important for me to come visit you. And I know that what I've heard on this visit is probably only, like I said, a tip of the iceberg of all the other things that need to happen. And so I hope that you'll let me come back and hear about the other needs of the faculty. I want to thank those students for being here. We were talking, and you said you didn't think any students would be here, and there are quite a few, so I really appreciate it. Any other questions? I can ask. Go ahead. I'm really okay. You can all leave, but
I actually do have to go get a plane.
Go.
Thank you, DeSantis. Art swag, thank you. We'll have you back. Thank you all for coming, especially to our presenters. I'm off to go meet with a bunch of respected students in California.
I already have met you. You came to my first year English class, and we're, as you know, researching models of what the postmodern university should be.
Yes.
And so you've listened to all of us. I wondered if you could give us a bit of vision about what maybe the mission, the curriculum, or the teaching practice of the 21st century university should be from your point of view. Just some highlights.
Well, I don't think it's a good idea for me. I'm going to answer the question, but preface it with, I don't think it's any president's right prescribe what is really in the faculty domain. It would be inappropriate for me to say this is what UBC should look like 5 years or 10 years from now. I really believe in in the sanctity of the faculty, the unit, and the faculty. Now, I am a faculty member, so I can talk about what I like that has emerged and what I think are opportunities. But I should not dictate what that should look like at this university. I'll tell you that as a university president, we all get together, and I've been a president for 8 years now, for many of these conferences, maybe 5, 6 years ago, there was this paranoia that terrestrial universities such as UBC would disappear because of this disruptive technology of distance or online education. And so, to answer your question, at that time I said, you might be paranoid that this might happen, but I really don't think it will ever happen. Because you can never replace, in an online modality, this very special ecosystem that is created by having faculty that you can bump into and talk to, and sometimes in a very spontaneous way, and the learning that occurs outside of the classroom. And so, if you remember when you were an undergraduate, it's distant memory for me, but remember you would take a class and you would go back and then you would talk about what the professor said with your fellow students and maybe another class student, those sorts of things. That cannot really be totally recreated in a totally virtual kind of dimension. So I will resist, personally, any kind of situation where there's a complete transition towards virtual or online education. Now, that being said, I really do believe that technology can augment traditional teaching methods. And I think that UBC is really at the cutting edge of that. We have an amazing person in Simon Bates and that whole group. And thinking about, on a regular basis, how to utilize that to enhance the learning experience and how to personalize that for particular students is something that I think is a real opportunity. You know, I've been fortunate to teach very large classes, in some cases 600 students. And I wish that I had the capability that exists now to actually look at how students actually view supplemental videos and where they pause. If you look at the Khan Academy at the K-12 sector, you can really see how that kind of analytics can help you understand where individual students are having problems. And you can also start to learn that different students master concepts in different ways. And so that can really help the professor and the teaching assistant or the research assistant when they're approaching student A, B, or C to be more effective. Because our goal is for everyone to succeed, right? It's a very difficult institution to get into when you have an entry bar of 93 or 94. The students are pretty smart. And so, you know, it's actually a failure if too many of our students don't get retained and don't graduate. So if we can use that kind of information and analytics so that more students can succeed, then I think that's a win. Any questions? Go ahead. What's your name?
My name's Nick, and I work in arts development on projects like the School of Music as well as the Arts Student Center. And this isn't really a question, but I just want to thank you because I've noticed since you have been a new president, you've been highly involved in our activities, and within the coming months, you've committed to coming out to, you know, 4 or 5 of our development and alumni engagement events. And I think that's really important for the donor and alumni community, having that sort of representation, because it just shows to them how committed we are to this. And I think, you know, it is helping further our projects too, to hopefully bring funding towards the university.
I mean, I don't need to be thanked. It's my joy. It's my pleasure. And I want to thank you for inviting me.
I'm sorry, I was just told there's actually a class.
Thank you very much.